Okay, today we're going to wrap up inflation with Inflation 3, Thoughts, Implications, and Advice. The vocab we're going to need for today, to recap, inflation is the average rise of prices every year. We usually use it as a percentage, such as hopefully 1, 2, or 3% rise of price year to year. Anything more is a little bit dangerous. Okay, the adjective real, such as real money or real dollars, means whatever prices you see are adjusted for inflation to today's money. So someone might have been earning $2 an hour in 1960, but we would call that real $22 an hour. So the real adjusts that $2 in 1960 for what it would purchase today, which would be 22. In that way, by adjusting for inflation, we keep the purchasing power equal, or we can compare the purchasing power. And purchasing power is how much an amount of money can buy. So $2 in 1960 has the same purchasing power as $22 today. And when we get more specific vocab from in the lesson, we'll come back and put it there. A key note to understand is that understanding inflation is essential to understanding anything with a cost over time. So if you can compare, if you can adjust for inflation, if you can do that, then you can compare things over time, and that gives you more information. It's not enough to say that private schools cost too much compared to today's starting salary. You could just live in the moment, look at a price and say, that's too much for me. But it gives you so much more information and lets you ask many more questions if you can compare the cost 10, 20, 30 years ago with the cost today. And it's not just going up. If the cost of something like TVs, if you compare them over time, you realize the cost of TVs has been going down. And that tells you something. It tells you that maybe many more companies are making TVs, so the supply is high. Maybe the parts have cost less. Who knows what it tells you, but it tells you something. And you would never get that if you just looked at the cost of something today. You need to understand inflation and look at the history of the cost. And it's anything with a cost. You can look at the production value of the United States, the budget of the federal government, the national debt, anything that is in dollars. You have to understand inflation, and you have to adjust for inflation. Otherwise, you literally can't think about it in terms of reality. So with that being said, let's get on to how understanding inflation can help us look at the world we live in today. So the first thing I want to talk about of how inflation and understanding inflation affects us is the need to get raises in our jobs. This is probably the most important of this whole video right here lesson, is that there has to be raises. And if you're in a job that doesn't give raises, you have to really seriously look at all the different factors, because if there's something else unless there's something really good that's holding you at that job, raises are a key part of every job. And it's because prices rise every single year. If prices didn't rise, maybe you could stay at the same job, live the same way for all your working career, and never get a raise because nothing changes. But since prices rise every single year, it's going to eat into the purchasing power of your salary. And within just a couple years, you're going to feel it if you don't get a raise. Let's bring over our friend inflation calculator, okay? If you don't get a raise, even if you say you have a job for $40,000 a year, you get it in 2010, and you don't get raises. Within 10 years, if you don't get raises, inflation has happened 20%. That means if you don't get raises, you're going to have to live with basically 20% less spending, even though you're earning the same amount of money. You're going to have to live with 20% less purchasing power because you didn't get raises. Now, here's something that people who don't understand inflation, they're going to be happy with a 2% raise every single year. And do you think their bosses are really going to tell them what about inflation? No. See, if you get a raise every single year, that's basically 1% or 2%. You're following inflation, which is 1 to 3%. You're basically just treading water. So after 5 years, even if you got a 2% raise every single year, after 5 years, you could still only buy the same amount of stuff as you could when you were being paid less. So raises every year that are the same as inflation does not increase your purchasing power, and you are basically treading water, staying the same. Now, if you're feeling okay with your life, maybe that's okay. Maybe if you're putting away a lot of money into your retirement account, maybe if you're covering all your bills, that's okay for you. But if you're not saving any money, if all the money that's coming in is going out and you're not saving any money, then even if you're getting raises and it's just the same as inflation, you're not going anywhere and you're not saving any money. And you'll never be able to save money because all the money that's coming in is going out. Now, raises that are more than inflation, that is actually a real increase in your pay. Real meaning adjusted for inflation. So the advice is, at the very minimum, actively seek a cost of living raise every single year. Everyone should be able to get that. If you're doing your job fine, if you're a good enough worker that is satisfying the expectations at the job, you should be able to get a cost of living raise. Your business should be increasing their prices every single year because of inflation. You should be getting a part of that by getting a cost of living inflation raise. And if you're working for the government increases their taxes every single year. Okay, property taxes go up every single year. How much? About 2%, 1.5 to 2. So even if you're working for a city, and if you're working for a state or federal government, everyone else's wages are going up, which means more taxes for the government. You should be able to get a cost of living at the very minimum, so you're treading water. Now, if you're in the private sector, you should be actively seeking performance raise or a longevity raise for being there for 3, 4, 6 years, okay? Your experience in sticking with them is worth a raise. So if you're good at your job, that means you're bringing value to the company, and you shouldn't just be staying at your starting salary. The better you get, the more value you give to the company, the more competent you are, the more you have to ask for not just a cost of living raise, but for a performance raise. You're worth more. If you truly are worth more than you were 2 years ago, well, they should pay you more. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be good at your job and competent, because you're not going to get this performance raise if you're not any better. They'll just give you a cost of living raise. But the more you can become better, the more you're worth it. And you have to make that case. Do you think your bosses want to give you a raise? No, you have to make that case. And this is something you have to actively look up and actively learn about, which is the art of getting a raise. It is a negotiation. It is based on your competence, and it is usually always initiated by you. You are your best advocate, and if you're very lucky, you can get your direct boss with you as a team to get you that raise. It is not something I'm an expert at, although I have studied it quite a bit, and I know the information is out there. And what's more important, I know that if you don't do it, if you're in the private sector and you aren't good at it, you will not get rewarded. And those who are good at getting raises are those that climb the wage ladder. And sometimes it goes all the way to actually changing your employer from one employer to another. It all depends how good you are at something, the market for something, and what your goals are with your salary. All I can tell you is once you're in your job and once you get good at your job, you better darn learn how to get your raises, because no one else is going to get them for you. Speaking of which, if you're in the private sector, hired by the government, you've got a union, and they will get your raises for you, okay? The union negotiates for your raises. So they do all the work. The downside is you can't negotiate yourself. So no matter how competent or good you are, you can't negotiate for a higher pay. But you've got your union negotiating to get that cost of living raise and longevity raise for every couple years you're there. Let's take a look. Let's see if teachers over the course of 18 years in a certain district have been getting the cost of living raises every year. Let's see if their pay has been keeping up with inflation. And the way we look at that is to look at starting salary for that district, okay? Because teachers' raises come in two parts. One, every year teachers get a cost of living raise. And two, every year teachers get a longevity raise. Every year they work, they get more money because it's another year they've worked at the district, okay? So we're going to focus only on the cost of living raise to see if it's paced with inflation. And we look at the starting salary. So in 2002, to the best of my memory, I am within $1,000, so I'm very close. The starting salary for this school district was $36,000 in 2002. And in 2020, the starting salary was $52,500, $52,500. Now, I'm not giving away any secrets. This is all public knowledge on the interwebs. And in fact, it's a New York State right that you have the right to know every government employee's salary. Here, let me actually pull it up. Whoa, starting teacher salary, where the heck did he get that? That's secret information. First Google result. It's not secret, people. First hit on the interwebs. So, master's salary with 6 years of schooling. Step 1 means first year teacher, 2019, $52,500. So by now you know how to figure out if this kept pace with inflation. Yep, that's right, our friend inflation calculator. So in 2002, starting salary was $36,000. And what would that be in real 2019 dollars? 51.1. Make that 2020. 52, which is almost exactly the same as starting salary. So you see, starting salary for the teachers in this district has exactly paced inflation over the last 18 years. The teachers are not getting paid more than they were 18 years ago, and they are not getting paid less than they were 18 years ago. It stayed the same. Purchasing power. All right, so now I'm going to examine, well, there is a fact, and then I'm going to examine implications of that fact, okay? Now that we know about real wages and adjusting for inflation and purchasing power, real wages haven't gone up for the middle class for a long time. It's exactly the same as real wages for teachers in the 18 years that you just saw as an example. Real wages hasn't gone up. Well, that's extrapolated to the whole middle class of the United States. Here's the claim. It's a fact, but it's a claim. I'll back it up. Since 1960s, the country has gotten richer, but real wages, the purchasing power of the average middle class, has stayed the same. Now, I'm going to have to take apart that sentence and prove it. Now, what do we mean when the country has gotten richer? Okay, so a way to judge one way to judge the economic power of a country or how rich a country is how much stuff it produces. And the flip side of how much stuff is produced new per year is how much is bought, which is how much did people earn. There's a lot of different, it all comes down to one, it's called the GDP, the gross domestic product. There's many different ways to look at this. This is just one. It's basically how much is the country making and buying and selling, the richness of the country. So we see, coming from 1960, that not only does the nominal GDP, the price of everything the country makes, go up, but the real GDP, that means every single year, except for the recessions and stuff, but look at that line. It means the United States is making more, getting richer every single year is a way to think about it. Now, I absolutely get it. Some of you might have thought, well, the population has gone up, so wouldn't we produce more? Okay, but the population since 1960 has only doubled, and the production, the richness, has doubled once, doubled twice, and a little bit more, okay? So it's not just a growth of population. In fact, we can look at that per person and we can see if there's growth. In this graph here, we've done the richness of the country, GDP, per person, and of course adjusted for inflation. Use your terms. Look, real GDP, which means adjusted for inflation, per person, starting with 1900. And we can see that the value of the country per person, the total value of the country divided by people, is continuing to go up from whatever 8.5 is all the way up to 10.75. So we see it is increasing. The value of the country per person, total value of the country per year divided by number of people, over time is increasing adjusted for inflation. So one might argue, and here's the argument, that if the value of the country is increasing over time, shouldn't the average wage of someone in the middle class be increasing over time? We're getting richer per person as a country, but we are not getting richer per person if you're middle class. And so you would think if we're getting richer as a country, shouldn't the middle class be having more purchasing power as we get richer as a country? But it's not true. Let's look at the charts. Here's one. Average median family income. Family income adjusted for inflation, so that means equal purchasing power, right? Starting at 1930 and going to 2015. And what we see going up to 1965, the purchasing power, actually up to 1970, the purchasing power of the average middle class increased from really impressively from $20,000 to $50,000. Just think of it in your own, these are real dollars, so you can understand it. So over 20 years, the average middle class American, 20 years ago, they could only afford $20,000 worth of stuff. Now they can afford 50. And that went from 1945's, or really back to even in 1940s, up to 1970. But since 1970, it has stayed around $50 to $55,000. It has plateaued. While the richness of the country has increased steadily since 1970, the purchasing power of the middle class has stayed, hasn't been, quote, sharing in the wealth growth of the country. I probably got 2 or 3 more that show the exact same thing. Average household income from year 2000. Basically a straight line with a recession right in the middle, okay? Now you'll notice that the actual dollar amount that the average middle class got increased, right? But remember, nominal versus adjusted for inflation. And this is why people don't see it. They don't see it because in 2000, the average middle class was making $40,000 a year. And they kept getting raises. They kept getting raises. So the average person is just like, I'm getting raises, I'm doing fine. But the raises were equal to inflation. And remember what we said, you're getting raises so you feel good, but you're just treading water because it's equal to inflation. So the people's purchasing power since the 2000s has stayed the same. They keep getting more raises and more money and they think that they're getting richer, but they're not because everything else is going up in cost. Real wages haven't gone up since the 70s. Average hourly wage since 1964, right? It goes up, everyone seems fine, but guess what? Real purchasing power stayed almost exactly the same. Middle class is not being able to buy more stuff. And finally, let's put those 2 graphs together into one. We've got the real average hourly earnings. Just like I had said, look at 1970, it sort of plateaus, okay? So the real purchasing power of the average earner stays the same. And remember the GDP per employee, okay, per production employee, it's almost like per capita, is going up. So the richness of the country per employee is going up, but the employee is keeping their wages the same. And you notice exactly what we said between the other 2 graphs. From 1945 to 1965, the worker, the average middle class worker, shared in the growth of the United States, and then the average worker was not sharing in the growth of the United States. So then someone would ask, okay, well, where's all that extra value going if it's not going to the middle class? Well, there's many answers to that. Some of that extra value might be redistributed through the government to lower income. Some of the extra value might be redistributed outside of the country. It all gets way too complicated. That's why some people go to school for 8 years to become an economist, right? But here's one place that some of the extra value is going. I've been talking about the middle class, but the top 10%, let's just call them rich, because what's above middle class? Rich. The top 10% earners have gotten richer. Every single year, the top 10% have more purchasing power, adjusted for inflation. Look, graphs are complicated. They can show whatever you sort of want. They're sourced by many different places. They're only as good as their numbers. I mean, this is straight from a report to Congress, so it's the best I can do. 1980 to 2018, real adjusted wages. When it says 90th percentile, that means the top 10%. 50th percentile is basically the average. So real wages for the average middle class goes up 6% in 40 years. The lowest 10, the poor, goes up 1.6. Basically, purchasing power stays the same. The top 10% of wage earners got 37% more purchasing power over those 40 years. So while the average and the low can buy the same amount every single year buy the same amount, the top 10% can buy more and more and more and more. Their real wages went up. I'm going to bloop the full table up here because it does separate it into different groups, and some people are very interested in identity groups. So I'm just going to bloop this up so you can see it broken out down by a couple Census Bureau identities. You can pause the video right now if you want to take a look closer into it. So I want to give a couple thoughts and then a couple questions, and I don't have answers to the questions. I'm still working through those. One thought is, even though that both my grandfather and me have basically the same purchasing power, okay? So roughly, he earned the same amount as me when we adjust for inflation. The quality and the variety, and to some degree the amount, of what I can buy blows whatever he could have bought out of the water. The car I buy is so much better than the car he bought. He bought a very big, heavy, standard definition TV that is ridiculously awful compared to the TV I can buy today. I would not actually, given the choice, I would not watch anything on the TV he had. Given it to me now, it is that bad. I would rather just do push-ups than watch TV on my grandfather's TV. He had 3 free television channels. There's actually still free television channels today, and there's about 8 of them. So you see, even the free is more. My grandfather paid the same amount of money for news. I get double the amount quality with pictures and all of that. My grandfather paid the same amount for clothes. I pay the same, but I get so much more variety. Roughly, the cost of housing is the same. So our wages are the same, the cost of housing is the same. The house we're living in today is so much more, just more. Think of it this way. It would be exactly the same as going back to my grandfather and saying, all right, Doug's grandfather, we're not going to pay you a cent more. We're going to pay you nothing more. And you get to have all of his stuff. His head would explode because he would look at the quality of my stuff, the technology of my stuff, and think I'm some sort of wizard. So would he have thought that that would be a raise? Well, heck yeah. The quality of it would be getting paid the same amount of money, but having the world opened up to you. The world. He would be living as the richest human being of that time. Like, basically, I mean, think about someone in the 1960s going around with a cell phone, with a TV like that, with 3D virtual realities, okay? Think of someone in the 1960s living like that. Yet we're being paid, according to those graphs, we're being paid the same amount in real dollars. But technology has changed, and life has changed, and information has changed. My grandfather could hire a personal trainer for 5 hours, and the quality of information he would have got is incomparable to the quality of scientific information I would get by hiring a personal trainer for 5 hours. So even the money value of knowledge has unbelievably increased over the last 60 years. So we're being paid the same, my grandfather and me, that flat graph. But what I get, the value of what I can buy is unbelievable compared to the 1960s. So you can't say, well, you haven't the average middle class hasn't gotten a raise for 60 years. Excuse excuse me, the average middle class in the last 60 years have become technological economic gods compared to the average middle class of the 1960s. And don't even tell me about life expectancy. How much more do we live? I'll look it up. Grandfather's average life expectancy, United States, 69 years old in 1960. Average life expectancy in 2020, 79 years. 9 to 10 years more. The average middle class still gets paid the same as they do when my grandfather was alive. But we've added all of this plus 9 years onto life, the average life expectancy. I know it's more complicated than that, but it does prove a point. Even if it's wrong by 50%, we've added 5 years of life, yet we're still getting paid the same. So you can't say we haven't got a raise. Of course, we haven't got a raise in real dollars, but we've gotten a raise in things. And not just things. Knowledge. And not just knowledge. Life. So you ask me and you say to me personally, are you happier that you're average middle class today than average middle class in your grandfather's time? I would say economically, yes, I am happier. So now I'm left with the question, am I upset about how it worked? Because from this graph, it could have been more. Could it have been more? If my wages have gone up with the production of the country, could I be not only having the better things, but could I be buying more? Could I be richer? Could we change the amount of stuff that the middle class could it be distributed? Could the wealth of the country be distributed to me more? And so I start thinking those questions, and a lot of people these are the current issues of the day. I'm just saying, I'm thinking about it. You could just say, translate, I'm thinking about to other people are advocating for it. I'm just thinking about it. Could I have more if it was more fair? Well, what is fair? We did talk about how the top 10% have gotten richer. So not only are they enjoying all the technological advances I, middle class, am, but they're able to get more of it because that GDP has gone to them, whereas I have stayed average. So is that fair? Is that why I might be angry? I started this with being so much happier than looking back at the middle class of my grandfather. I started happy with my life. But now should I be angry because the top 10% get more? Disproportionately more. Don't say that they worked hard for it, okay? That's a complex thing because it's disproportionately more, okay? The top 10% today are working just as hard as the top 10% in my grandfather 1960, but the top 10% get a higher percentage for working. Okay? We can talk about that. It's complicated. But am I unhappy because I'm just comparing myself to the extra gains the 10% are getting? And is that jealousy? Or is it just part of the system? And I ask myself too, where did these technological advances come from? I mean, I know what life looks like right now. I know what life looks like. But what would life look like if, since 1980, those top 10% didn't get more richer than the average? The average stayed the same, the poor stayed the same, the top 10% went up. What would life look like? Did somehow this cause all the technological advances, the advances in business, the advances of globalization, the advances of growth? Because I kind of like the advances of technology, the advances of growth. So did the inequality cause the increase in the quality of products? And what would wage growth equality cause stagnation? What if we did try to make everyone's wage growth kind of equal? I mean, would we be looking at some sort of Soviet Union communist economy where there isn't technological advances? Now, these are incredible questions that I just wonder, and I have no clue of the answer. But because I am not a PhD economist, I cannot say anything like how it exists is entirely good or entirely bad. I don't know the answers to that. And I don't know the effects of radically altering the system. Although I am willing to find out, because when you alter the system a little bit, you can measure the changes. So maybe I would like to adjust the graphs a little by having a little bit more real wages go up for the middle class and having real wages go down a little bit for the top. I'm open to adjusting the system as long as we can go forward slowly and measure how it changes things. And as such, I don't have a wrap up to what it means that the middle class wages have not increased and the poor's wages have not. I don't have a wrap up to that. All I can say is that's the starting point of which you have to look into. And don't just jump to the end point, because you've got to consider a lot of things and you got to research a lot and talk to a lot of people. What I will end with, though, is I'm very happy about the quality and technological advances. And I can stand firm that I don't get paid more than my grandfather. But I like the stuff that comes from the same amount of pay for me a lot better than the stuff that he could afford back in his day. So I'll end it at that. Thanks for watching.